Thank you for joining us here at Rock Hard Riffs for this very special episode, If I Leave Here Tomorrow, the documentary about the great Lynyrd Skynyrd. Well, hi there guys, thanks for joining us here at Rock Hard Riffs. This is the guitar channel for the self-taught and other cool rock and roll stuff. Once again, we have other cool rock and roll stuff in this episode. We have several other documentary overviews that we've done. I'll try to list some of them in the description. Please take a peek at those if you're interested. Elvis, the Beatles, the Hollies. We've done several different documentary overviews. So if you enjoy this, please check those out. And if you haven't already, we humbly ask if you would please subscribe. We would truly appreciate that. So let's get on with the documentary. There are a lot of things in this documentary that I was not aware of. Now, I'm not going to say that I know everything about Lynyrd Skynyrd at all, but I've watched other shows about them, like the old VH1 show, the Behind the Music. I've watched that several times about them and things like that. So I knew a fair bit about them. But this documentary, I learned a whole lot. And I've got to say that one thing that I kept laughing throughout the entire thing. There are some really funny stories. And I'm not going to tell you too much about it. I don't like to give anything too much away. I'll tell you a few things. But what we'll do now is we'll go over kind of an overview of what they went over in the documentary. And then a little bit of editorial on my part after that. So in the beginning, they showed that Lynyrd Skynyrd actually had begun jamming together, the guys in the band, in the mid-'60s. They had been together that long, and they were all kind of neighborhood kids, hung around. They're all from Florida at that point. Now, of course, there were other members that were from other areas of the country, and that's part of also what we'll discuss later. But they were, it's like a garage band kind of thing. They were high school buddies or whatever, and they get together. They start learning their instruments and all that stuff, and they start playing parties, just like the typical garage band situation. Another thing I learned is their original name was the 1%. That's pretty interesting when you think about it today, too, but they're originally called the 1%. And then, of course, it goes on to explain how they got their name. Now, most of us know the general story of Lynyrd Skynyrd and how the name came about, but there's some little added anecdotes and stuff in here about how the name really came about, and some of it is just pretty darn funny. Also, early on, they had met Ed King. He was, at the time, was in the band Strawberry Alarm Clock, and he went into Jacksonville in that area to seek out a different music scene, and he had run into the band, Lynyrd Skynyrd at that time, but had not yet joined. Now, one of the things that Ronnie Van Zant called the guys in the band was street people. They thought they were all kind of gritty street people, and that's what they would sing and write about, and that's what a lot of their music wound up to be about. Some other really cool stuff that I had not known about was a place that they called the Hell House. And this is way out in some swampy area of the west side of Jacksonville, Florida. And it was a practice room. It was a jam room. It was way out in the middle of this creaky, swampy area, and there were supposedly gators out there and tons of huge mosquitoes and rattlesnakes and water moccasins. And this is where they jammed and sometimes slept because they had to protect some of their gear. Then the band moved on and started recording at Muscle Shoals in Alabama and signed with Sounds of the South Records. Now, at this time, when they were in this, at this point, they had written Freebird. They were out scouting. They had a manager out scouting stuff, and they were turned down by no less than 9 different record companies. And that kind of takes you back to some of the old stories. Same thing like the Beatles, that they were turned down by everybody until the very last one. Isn't that how it always happens? It was basically at this point that Billy Powell and Ed King and Leon Wilkeson had joined the band. Famous Ed King, who had just recently passed away. Another interesting little tidbit I learned, that Billy Powell said that his major rock and roll boogie woogie influence on piano was the Beatles. Go figure. Another really interesting part was when they showed how Ed King and Gary Rosington and all the guys sat down and wrote Sweet Home Alabama. And then from then on, of course, was the famous semi-feud between the band and Neil Young. And this again, at this point, I'm starting to see recurring themes in the documentary. It just over and over, there's a type of recurring theme that we'll talk about in the end. But one thing that I'll give a hint about is that even though they had this so-called feud, Ronnie Van Zant was always seen wearing a Neil Young t-shirt, even in concert. And I thought that's really a classy move on their part. And again, that's part of a recurring theme, one of two recurring themes I've seen throughout the documentary. The primary guys that we see in the documentary are Gary Rosington, a little bit of Johnny Van Zant, not quite as much as you might think, and Artemis Powell later on, and he plays quite a big part in the documentary. Artemis Powell, what an interesting character. I'd always kind of been interested in him. And after watching this, man, this guy is great. I love Artemis Powell. What a great guy. Their primary influences are Delta blues and bluegrass, which is, that's that southern rock thing, and so much of just plain old great rock and roll. They said that they were absolutely making a statement with the song Midnight Special and different things. Their political views and stuff might actually surprise you, or at least surprise those that might have a different viewpoint, or might have like a preconceived idea of what these Southern gentlemen were about. But it might actually really surprise you. Again, it was another part of this ongoing theme that I was mentioning before that really interested me, and personally I found it very moving. Another interesting thing about Artemis Pyle was that he was a former Marine and what they called a wild man. And Ronnie Van Zant was kind of the major hellraiser of the band. Nobody would really mess with him. But he would not mess with Artemis Pyle, I guess, was how the story went. There were other parts where they spoke about some really funny road trip stories. I'll share two with you that just had me on the floor rolling in laughter. One of the stories was Artemis Pyle. They were in New York City. I think they were like at a record party or something like that, and they were in this area, having a good time. And Artemis said that he had slipped a little something under his tongue, if you know what I mean, before they got to the party. So they were hanging out there and having a good time, and he was sitting there with Gary Rosington when up comes a monkey on roller skates and sat down next to them and grabbed a bottle of Jack Daniels and proceeded to drink with them. So he said that, of course, he was under the influence of a certain chemical, and up comes a monkey on roller skates drinking Jack Daniels. He said, okay. Can you imagine? Another really great story was about Ed King and the Slim Jims. He had this little side business with Slim Jims on the road with the band. I'm not going to give it away, but it's in the documentary, and I just thought that was just an absolute freaking riot. Now, there were some certain darker aspects that were in the documentary, and a lot of that was mentioning about Ronnie Van Zant's drinking. And boy, he did some awfully nasty things when he was drunk. He had at one point, when they were in Europe, had taken a broken bottle and took them to the back of Gary Rosington's hands and had said to him, "You're never going to play the guitar again." He did it to both of his hands. Kind of dastardly, boy, that's, just shows you what horrible things you can do sometimes if you can't handle your liquor. And that certainly was the case in this instance. Now, another thing that the guys kept talking about was the supposed Southern image, or this rebel image, or the Confederate flag type image that they were portraying. They said that most of this was really just hype. But Artemis Pyle, I thought, just said the most beautiful thing about the Confederate flag. And he said that he played under it every night. It was always back there behind him, and he knew it was there. But it didn't bother him that much because he knew what it meant to him. And I thought, he knew what it meant to him. What exactly is he saying? And I thought about it, and I thought about it. And I've watched this documentary 3.5 times now. And boy, I just came to the realization that the guy is so secure in his mind that he knew that it upset other people. He knew it was painful to other people. And at that point also, the entire band said that they realized that that symbol can be hurtful to some people and that they had absolutely no intentions of the Confederate flag, symbolism of it and that sort of thing, had nothing to do with their personal or political feelings. And the way they had expressed it, especially Artemis Pyle, to me I found it really touching. And I thought, boy, these guys are just some good old boys. And they've got really loving hearts, and these are caring guys. And that was one of the recurring themes that I found that went over and over, is that these guys just loved each other. And they loved music, and it just showed, doesn't it really? I mean, you feel the camaraderie with the band. The music is great. All of it was, the really early great stuff was written in a shotgun shack on a creek in a swamp, if you think about it. I mean, you develop a certain brotherhood in those kind of conditions, kind of like war. Then after Ed King had left, Steve Gaines had joined the band, and his sister. And boy, that guy was real talent, wasn't he? He could really sing and really play, really fantastic. Then they go into the aspects after that of the plane crash, and still to this day they are still finding pieces of that airplane. Really sad, but again, there are more very, very touching stories about the aftermath of the plane crash and what happened. Now I know that there is a certain drama behind between certain people with what happened after the crash, but that was not in the documentary. And historically, I suppose maybe it should be in there, but on a personal or ethical or moral level, I'm glad that they didn't, because who needs their dirty laundry aired constantly? It may or may not have been necessary, but I'll say I just didn't miss that part of it, though I did notice that it was omitted. Then at this point we're reaching the end, and Gary Rosington explains how they had gone out for their tribute tours and how things had redeveloped with Johnny Van Zant now taking his brother's place. And, you know, guys, I'll just kind of wind it up here. I thought it was just a really excellent documentary. It made me laugh my ass off, and at some points it kind of brought me to tears. There was so much tragedy that had come upon this band at the plane crash and after they had lost so many members, even still, and just up to this point with Ed King. But what a great band. These guys definitely, they were portrayed, I thought, very touchingly and very humanly in the documentary. I thought they did an outstanding job at that. So I would really, really highly recommend this. If you're just a rock and roll fan in general, you don't have to be a Southern rock fan, rock and roll in general, if you just love music, I really found this to be an outstanding documentary, and I'm really glad we watched it. Guys, don't forget we have done plenty of other overviews on other rock documentaries. Don't miss them. Look down in the description. And also, please subscribe if you have not yet. We really appreciate that. Thanks, guys. We will see you next video.